Hello and welcome to the Career Changers. Our guest today is Scott Graham, business coach helping people who want more balanced direction and fulfillment in their life, career, and relationships. Today, Scott is going to explain how we can achieve the unachievable in our lives. Hi, Scott. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, it's great to be here, Elisa.
And it's great to have you. So let's start to talk a little bit about your professional life. So I read your biography and I've seen that you have different experiences before becoming a coach. How and when did you start thinking about becoming a coach?
I really started my coaching practice in 2006. That's when I launched the business and started to work with clients. But I'd been a coach doing things coachy like many years before that as a therapist, as a counselor, as an outward bound instructor. I've been active in doing those types of things my entire career, helping people achieve the things they couldn't think they could achieve.
So what has been your first career?
I started off as a prevention specialist in Tampa, Florida, in the United States. And that was really geared towards working with inner city youth who might have had drug problems in schools. And then from there, I moved up to the Northeast and worked for Outward Bound as an Outward Bound instructor. And then became a program director in Outward Bound in Boston, Massachusetts, in the United States, and then moved from there to becoming a counselor and psychotherapist, and then after that became a coach.
So you had many career changes.
Many.
So what challenges did you have to overcome while transitioning from one career to the other?
The biggest challenges were trying to figure out and this is a piece that a lot of people struggle with when they're switching or evolving their careers, and that is taking those skills and abilities and knowledge from one area and translating them to the new area that you're going into. A lot of folks really struggle with how does my skill working in mechanics translate to this new career working with people. And they're similar, because if you're a mechanic, you're working on systems, you're working on processes, you have to have a functional knowledge of how things work mechanically. When you're working with people, that same thing is true. You have to have a knowledge about how people work together. You have to have a knowledge of systems. You have to have a knowledge of processes. But people that go from different fields, like mechanics to people, struggle with saying, how does this information in one field apply to this other field? And I struggled with that too.
So in your work or through your work, you're helping people to achieve the unachievable. That sounds really great. First of all, what is usually seen as unachievable by the majority of people?
It varies from person to person and the experiences that they've had in their life. A lot of times it comes down to your own mental outlook and what you create as barriers to what you think you can and can't do. A lot of people say things like, I can I can never work in this kind of job. But in their history, if you dive deep into their history, you can find that there were times where they were struggling to be successful, but they persevered and had the discipline to make that a reality. For example, somebody says, I can't be successful in this job because I have no attention to detail. And then somebody else, you look back in their career, and they were very successful when they were in college, and they were able to get A's and B's when they were in college, and that requires a big attention to detail. You have to pass the test. You have to know you have to learn the information. And so that translates to this situation. Somebody else says, you know what, I don't have the discipline to train and run a marathon. I want to run a marathon really bad. I mean, that's a big dream of mine, but I can't get out there and train hours and hours and hours each week. Yet you dig into that person's past, and it turns out they play the piano. And in order to master the piano, they had to train for hours and hours and hours each week. And so the discipline's the same, but they somehow don't recognize that the same skills they used to master the piano is a skill to master a marathon.
Hmm. So you mentioned the role of our minds in thinking that something is unachievable. Are there any tools that we can use or techniques to, I wouldn't say control maybe, but to have an impact on our thinking and transform what we think is unachievable in achievable?
Absolutely. And it goes back to the things that we say to ourselves and the reality that we think we can create. One of the things that psychotherapists use a lot, and coaches use this too, and I'll start this by saying it's really ineffective. Coaches use this piece where they talk about affirmations. And affirmations are things like, I'm a good person. I'm a fantastic person. I'm a special person. I love myself. I can do it. I'm smart. All of these things. They're like wishes. And it's almost like you're trying to convince yourself about the way that you want the world to be. Affirmations never work, ever. We think they work. We want to believe they work, but really they don't work because there's a piece in our mind that says, well, I really don't believe that. So when I work with clients, I focus on what I call antidotes. And antidotes are similar to affirmations, but they lock into a truth of who we are, a truth of our past. Just like that example that I talked about of running the marathon and having the discipline to train because I practice the piano, right? So an affirmation would be, I love running. I can run. I'm going to complete a marathon. I have self-discipline. That would be an affirmation. An antidote would be, there was a time in my life where I didn't know how to play the piano, and I mastered the piano by determination and diligence. If I can do that then, I can do that now. So I can be just as diligent and I can run. I just have to make it work. That's an antidote. That's locked in truth versus an affirmation, which is locked in a wish. I'm working on my 16th book now, and I really struggled with writing because in order to produce a number of books, you really need to do more than write on the weekends. You need to write every day. And I really struggled with the daily writing habit. I practice piano myself. I was a music major many years in college. And in order to get through college with a music major, I had to practice every day. So I could have come up with an affirmation that said, I'm a writer. I love writing. I can write. Writing is great. I'm going to write 200 books or some other vision like that, some wishful thing. And that would have gotten me nowhere. I actually wrote an affirmation, an antidote on a index card that basically said I was able to practice the piano for an hour a day when I was younger. In order for me to be successful as a writer, I have to write an hour a day. If I can do that then, I can do this now. And I read that every single day, and reading that every single day in the morning gave me that writing habit. Not because I wished it into existence, but because I found a truth in myself that I could tap into and make reality again.
Mm. So if we go a little bit deeper, what
Mhm.
about the conditioning coming from our childhood when we think that something is unachievable? Is there anything you can say about that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the things I say to clients when they're struggling with pieces that they're just like, I'm not sure if I can do this, or where is that coming from, or they lock into this piece of their past. It's the same thing, that piece that you're talking about, I refer to as a poison. So your antidote is you lock into something from your past, a story like the piano I just talked about, and that truth propels you to be able to do that every day. That example that you're talking about, where somebody says, well, this happened in my childhood, is the flip side of that coin. It's the poison to the antidote. They are locking into something in their history, and they're using that thing in their history as evidence to say, I can't do this piece. It's the same thing as the antidote, except where the antidote propels you forward because you lock into a piece of your history. If I did this then, I can do this now. You're doing the exact opposite. You're saying, well, this happened to me, so now I can't do this. And so the piece with that is, what do we focus on from our past? Do we focus on the things that are going to, we all have bad things that have happened to us. We all have good things that have happened to us. We all have experienced happiness and joy. We all have experienced misery. We all have experienced times where we had great self-discipline, and we've all experienced times where we are lazy. The question is, when you think about yourself, what are the qualities that you want to focus on? What are the qualities that are going to propel you forward? And by focusing on those other stories, those true stories of those good qualities, it's like feeding flowers in your garden and weeding out the weeds. By focusing on those true stories, you're watering the flowers, you're bringing them to bloom, instead of focusing on the weeds, which then overtake your garden, and then you've got a garden of that's messy and ugly.
I really like that metaphor. So we often forget how each of us, with our choices, can have a positive impact in the world. How do you feel your career change has made the world a better place?
One of the things that I focus on in working with clients is not just helping them selfishly achieve their needs, but inspiring them to reach out and give back and make the world a better place. I, in my own personal life, uh, am really driven in that way. In addition to being a coach, I run a non-for-profit farm animal rescue and save abandoned, neglected, abused farm animals. There's no place for them to go. They don't typically go to the Humane Society. They deal with cats and dogs. So sheep and cows and horses and donkeys and pigs, if they're abused, there's no place for them to go. I volunteer as an EMT. I volunteer, which is in the United States, it's a first responder for medical issues. I volunteer as a firefighter. I volunteer to make my community a better place. And I talk about that with the clients that I work with, because if they are making the world a better place, I'm multiplying my impact on the world. That's one of the reasons that I started writing books, so I could take some of these concepts that I have and get them to more and more people.
Mm. So fear, lack of clarity, and confusion can make us wonder if there is more to life than what we are living. What can make us understand if we are heading in the right direction?
One of the pieces that a lot of folks don't do is they don't think about the overall direction of their life. They think in terms of years or months or weeks or days, but they don't think in terms of lifetimes. They don't think about, where do I want to be? What kind of life do I want to have? We don't even talk about that in school. When we talk about careers, we talk about career aptitudes. We talk about, what are you good at? What skills do you have? But we never talk about, what kind of life do you want to have? What's a meaningful life to me? And most people never go there until something bad happens or something big happens, like your best friend dies, or you reach a certain age, like 40. 40 seems to be a big age. 50 is another big age. People hit that age and they look and they're like, oh my God, half my life is gone. What am I going to do? Where am I going to go? What is going to happen? And they freak out because they haven't taken the time to make sure that they are moving in the direction they want to go to. So what's the vision for your life is what I'd ask the listeners. Where do you want to be in 15 years? When you get to your deathbed and you look back on your life, what kind of life do you want to have? Is it a life full of things? BMWs, houses? Is it a life full of service? Is it a life full of loving relationships? What's more important to you? Is it more important to you to be a good mother or a good entrepreneur? What's more important to you? Is it important to you to be a good businessman or a good father? And people don't deal with these questions until they look back and they're like, wow, I had a great career and I'm making, thousands and thousands and thousands right now, but I'm getting a divorce. Right? No one sits down and says, I want to be a successful something. I want to be a successful entrepreneur, and I hope I end up an alcoholic, fat, and divorced. No one does that. They just assume those things are going to come along. But you know what? Being healthy, being a good parent, being in a good relationship, being a good spouse, those things time and time and time again outweigh all of these other decisions that are driven by money and things. And people get derailed by that because they don't have a clear vision. Marketers are always hitting you saying, buy this, do this, do this, do this. You need to have your own piece that says, this is the person I want to be. Otherwise, you get derailed.
Yeah, that's really true. And I think also once you have that vision, then one of the most important things is you learn to say no to everything else that doesn't fit into your vision. And that is what can allow you to move forward on the right path to self-realization.
Right. One of the things I've done with coaching clients in the past, and this is a common coaching tool that a lot of therapists and coaches use, is asking clients, and your listeners can do this, to sit down and write their most feared obituary. So you think, all right, I'm gonna pretend that I've died, and I'm gonna write the obituary of the person that would be absolutely horrible. And they take their time and write that, and that can really shake them up, especially if the things they're writing in their most feared obituary are actually things they're doing in their life right now, right? I write about myself and say, Scott never spent time with his kids. And then I look at my life, and that's my most feared obituary. And then I look at my life and I'm like, I'm not spending a lot of time with my kids. That can really shake people up and get people into action.
Yeah, that's such a great suggestion. And yeah, hopefully our listeners and followers we put that into action. And I think, yeah, everything that you're talking about, once you have that clarity, as I said before, it also allows you to pinpoint the things you're doing wrong at the moment and to say, oh, wait a moment, this is not going to take me in that direction. So this is a bad habit, or I need to stop. And
Right.
sometimes is especially, I don't know, in our times, maybe it's always been like this, I don't know, but it's easy to fall into compulsive behaviors, to avoid our real feelings, because also looking into ourselves, what we need and what do we want, it may be scary because, as you said earlier, we also need to practice to you don't achieve something from today to tomorrow. It's like
No,
playing the piano or training for the marathon. So sometimes it's easier to look at the easier escape, and and in the meantime, your life may be gone.
exactly. Exactly. It's very important to bring things right into the present so that you're saying to yourself, how can I be the best person I can be today? And how does being the best person I can be today take me forward so that I am becoming, so that I am evolving, so I am growing to be the best person I can be 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now. One of my most recent books that I wrote was exactly about that. It's a book about creating your bucket list. And unlike a lot of other bucket list books out there, it's not just about the bucket list. It's not about making this long list of things of, oh, I want to eat sushi. Oh, I want to go on and be on top of the Eiffel Tower. Oh, I want to go, swim across this lake. Oh, I want to climb on top of this mountain. It's about identifying those things and then working through a process to take the values, the ideas, the qualities of those things and bring that into your life today. So one person says, you know what, my bucket list, I want to be there when my son graduates from college. I want to be a good grandfather. I want to take my kids to Disneyland. I want to be a solid parent. I want to be a solid grandparent. Those things on that person's bucket list are around family. Those values are around relationships. And that person can ask themselves, how can I be better at that in my life today? And create a plan so that if they never take their kids to Disneyland, they still have an incredible life because their life reflects the values, qualities, and ideals that are reflected in the things that are on their bucket list.
So in your experience, how important is to find our life purpose, and how can having a life purpose change our professional lives?
It is critically important. If you don't have an inkling about what your life purpose is, and that's, by the way, why this bucket list piece is so critical to help people figure out their life purpose, because a lot of people know what they want to do, know what kind of life they like to have, are able to sit down and write their worst obituary, but they're not able to identify the values and guideposts for their life today. And if you don't do those pieces, then you live the life that somebody else has planned for you. And you know what? If you're living the life that somebody else has planned for you, whether it be your employer, whether it be, the government, whether it be your cousin, whether it be whoever it is, if you're living the life that they have planned for you, they don't have much planned for you. You have to really live the life that's core to yourself. And if you have your values aligned, like for example, someone did that bucket list piece, and they know that family's important, and they say to themselves, that's more important than anything else, then in their career, when their boss says, can you stay 20 minutes after work? And you're like, oh, I got to go help my kid with their homework. You're like, no, I can't. You don't even hesitate. You are so crystal clear that when you're older, you're going to look back in your life and say, you know what? It wasn't important for me to stay that 15 minutes after work. I had to go help my kid with his homework. And then you just make that decision like that, and away you go. Somebody who's not clear on their vision might stay hours after work because that's what their boss needs them to do, because there's a audit, there's a review, there's something coming up. There's always going to be something coming up that somebody needs you to stay after work for hours and hours and hours. There's not enough employees, there's not enough this, there's a special event, we all need to do it. You know, they're not turning to you and say, oh, you need to spend more time with your son and help him with his homework. You have to do that yourself. And if you're not clear on your vision, you're not going to do that.
So why are we often so scared to ask for guidance, and what difference can make having someone to guide us in the right direction?
I think a lot of folks are afraid to ask for guidance because they're it can be tumultuous to make changes in your life. It can feel scary to make changes in your life. You're not sure of the path you're going down, and you're afraid of the outcome, right? It's almost like I'm safer here, staying here, huddled up in my home in this storm, even though I know it's not a safe place to be, and it's not good for me, and I'm still going to stay here because I'm afraid to venture outward. And you really need to take that risk and venture outward and work with a guide that can help you if you can't figure it out yourself. You know, the reality is in our information world today is that everything we need, everything is available on the internet or in book format. Pick a topic. I want to lose weight. There's a million books on Amazon about losing weight. Want to be a better father? There's a bunch of books on Amazon about that. You want to be a better, a better spouse? There's tons of websites and podcasts that you can listen to. People listen to podcasts, people like this, people read books, people go to websites. You would think with all this information, we would live in a perfect world. A perfect world, right? Right?
Yeah, but we don't.
But we don't. But we don't. It's not the lack. It's not that there's a lack of information. There's a lack of action. That's the piece. And having a guide, an advisor, a partner, a coach that can help you take action, that's the key. What we talked about so far in this podcast, we talked about, write your worst obituary. People could Google that and probably find a worksheet to do that. I talked about my bucket list book. People could find that. It's available for free. That book's available for free.
That's amazing.
I wonder how many people are going to go and Google and do their worst obituary and get the bucket list book for free. Probably not many. And that's why it's important to engage somebody, because people want this stuff. They're just stuck.
Yeah. So let's go back to your career, and I just want to ask a question we ask to every guest on the Career Changers. What was your dream job when you were a child?
What was my, I will go fast forward to when I took an Outward Bound course. Are you familiar with Outward Bound? No. So for you and for your readers who are or your listeners, sorry, who might not be familiar, Outward Bound was started by a person from the UK named Kurt Hahn, and he noticed that what compelled him to create this model of Outward Bound was that he noticed that in World War II, ships would get sunk by German U-boats, and almost every single time they found this pattern where older sailors who were weaker and more frail in these shipwrecks would survive the younger sailors who were stronger, more fit, more capable. And so he devised this, or he concluded that the reason for this was just that they gave up hope. They just stopped, they lost the will to live, because really they should have survived because they were younger and more fit, and the older sailors should have died. And so he created Outward Bound to put people in those circumstances where they thought, oh my God, I can't make it. Oh my God, I can't do it. Oh my God, what's going to happen to me? And then give them that experience on the other side. Most Outward Bound courses surround some sort of outdoor activity: hiking, canoeing, rock climbing, snowshoeing, some piece where you're for a period of day of time. So I took an Outward Bound course when I was just in college, and that was in the Florida Everglades in the United States. Swampy, alligators, snakes. I was canoeing there for 10 days in this group. And one of the things they asked us to do was to create a list of 20 things we wanted to achieve in our life. And I wrote down the list, and I mean, this was in the 1980s when I did this, many, many, many years ago. There were no computers, no smartphones, nothing like that. I wrote it down on a piece of paper. Somehow I managed to save that paper. I still have that paper. They gave us a journal to write, and I still have that paper. Once we finished that, we had to figure out what the theme was. And number one on my list was to make a difference in other people's lives. It's really interesting because I put that list away. I came up with that list, but I didn't read that list every day. I didn't think about it every day. But the reality of that, this is the piece we're talking about here with vision and your listeners, is that I had pinpointed a clear vision in my life. And even though I didn't write it down, and even though I didn't read it every day, in fact, I misplaced that paper up until 10 years ago, I had identified that trajectory of where I wanted to go. And because I did that, my life followed that path. And I made choices that were in alignment with that, because in the back of my mind, that was the clear vision of who I wanted to be.
That's a great story. And yeah, they always suggest to write our dreams down on paper so they can manifest. So it seems it happened for you.
Yes.
So looking back at your multiple careers, is there been any moment in your life that has been really a turning point for you, like an enlightening moment, an event or an episode, something that happened in your careers?
That Outward Bound course that I just talked about was a big shift for who I wanted to be and where I wanted to go. In fact, one of the pieces that Outward Bound talks about, the Outward Bound motto is to strive, to serve, and not to yield. And I think that every single facet of what I do today reflects those values of compassion, those values of what Outward Bound calls tenacity in pursuit, which means really being focused on what you want and going for that, not giving up, no matter what that is. That Outward Bound course in the 1980s is probably the most pivotal moment of my life. And it's funny because I was able to find the instructors that were on that course. One of the instructors who was on that course, I was able to find him years and years later to thank him for that experience, because I didn't know who he was. I just knew his first, I didn't even know his name. He had a nickname. It was Doc. That's all I knew, was I was on this course with some guy that's named Doc. And I decided about 15 years ago to try and find this person who had made such a impact on my life. And I was able to find him, was able to thank him, and really tell him about what ripple effect he created, right? He helped me to get me moving in a direction, and I've helped other people move in that direction of their lives. So in many ways, he helped those folks.
Yeah, it's always
What I
nice.
strive to do.
It's really nice to find someone many years later and be able to talk to them on the impact they had on our lives. And I think this is also, it's a topic that is important to us at the Career Changers, because often people change other people's lives, but they are not aware of it. And this is come down back to what we were talking about, what the person we want to be, what person do we want to be in our lives, and how our action can actually impact other people's lives, and also the planet, as this is another very important topic at the moment. So I'm really enjoying this conversation with you, and we are approaching now the end of this episode, but we still have a few questions specifically target at everyone that is still searching. So what type of advice would you give to anyone along their path to self-realization?
I think the best advice that I can give to somebody is to take some time today, not tomorrow, not next week, not next weekend, but today, and sit down just by yourself with a blank piece of paper and answer this question. If I'm living my ideal life, what does that look like? Just that simple question. If I'm living my ideal life, what does that look like? That's a vision question. And explore every aspect of that life from that question in your own head and on that paper. Explore your family life. If you have a family, if you don't have a family, then don't explore your family life. Move on to something else. If you have dogs and cats as pets, what does that mean as a caregiver and friend of animals, right? What does that mean if that's in your life? If you like music, what does that mean? If you think about your career, what does that mean? How do all these pieces connect? And don't forget about your spirituality and your emotional self. Lots of times people are able to identify the questions around their career, or what kind of spouse I want to be, or what kind of dog owner do I want to be, or dog companion do I want to be, but they can't identify what does it mean to be happy? What does it mean to be joyful? What does it mean to be spiritually connected? They think, oh, well, it means I have to go to church, or I have to go to mosque, or I have to go to temple, or I have to do this. And they come up with this list of things to do, as opposed to ways to be. I knew a lot of people when I was growing up that would go to church, for example, and boy, the second that church was over, they were behind their car, swearing at people, tooting the horn. They couldn't wait to they were the most unspiritual people ever, but they were very spiritual in terms of their things that they did. And I knew people that never went to church, never went to temple, never went to mosque, and they were probably the most spiritual people I've met, because they lived in alignment with who they are. They lived in alignment with their spirit. They lived in alignment with every being on the planet. All their actions were focused on their betterment and the betterment of others. So don't forget about those other pieces as you write that down on your piece of paper, put it all out there, and then let it sit for 2 or 3 days. and come back to it with a highlighter, a yellow highlighter or a pink highlighter, doesn't matter what the color is. And then once you've got that highlighter in your hand and you've looked over this pieces, highlight the 10 most powerful words in what you wrote. It doesn't need to be, I want to be an engineer. It doesn't need to be career related. You're just looking for the most powerful words. And those words will, I tell you, guarantee, positively guarantee, those words will reflect your direction that you want to go in. And if you just put those words up without even forming a sentence and just see them every day, they will help guide you to being the person you want to be and living a life of abundance and living in a life that's incredible.
So there was a great answer related to anyone that is still searching. Many times we have to do lots of soul searching before we can find our ways and along the path to self-realization. What about any advice specifically related to someone that is looking to change their careers and they feel stuck?
If you're looking to change your careers and you're feeling stuck, it is really important that you figure out ultimately where you want to go to. This same exercise comes to play, but if you're at the point of changing your careers and thinking about that, you probably also need to think about your finances. You need to think about money. Most likely, people who are changing careers, unlike people who are new in their careers, have to deal with things like mortgages, car payments, student loans, loans to get their kids in school. They might have a whole bunch of other financial obligations that they have to meet in order to continue the life that they've already started. And so you really need to think about what those financial implications are going to be in the life that you design. I'll give you an example. I had a person who came to me and he was at the top of his field for what he wanted to do. He had worked his whole life. He was in his 50s, excuse me, and had worked his whole life to be this great engineer. His parents wanted him to be this engineer. He went to school, got his master's degree to be an engineer, started working at his doctorate, and had attained the top of his field. And then he realized in his 50s that he hated being an engineer. Hated it. It was just misery for him. And he had accrued he could take 2 to 3 months off a year because of how long he'd been in the field, and he was an expert, and he was really thinking about, you know what, I really want to be like a counselor. I want to be a therapist. I want to help people. And that's going to be the life that I want to lead. So his conclusion was to go back to school. He was going to quit his job and go back to school and get another master's degree in counseling. And we figured out how much, if he quit his job, we just did this on a spreadsheet. It was all about money. If he quit his job and got loans to go to school and money from the bank to go to school to pay his mortgage while he was going to school, and was able to do that, and then figured out how much he would make, which was a lot less as a counselor than an engineer, how much he would make as a counselor, and how many years he'd have to work to collect all that money and pay it all back. We were just looking at money, like how much would it take? And we figured that he'd retire at age 65. We just picked a number at random. And we were able to figure out that for that same amount of money, he could take 3 months off a year and fly to other countries and work for the Peace Corps and help people who were struggling, and shift his life in such a way so that he was living the value of service, of helping people, of community, of making a difference without having to go through all this financial stress and go to this career that he thought was his solution, but really wasn't. You know, one of the things most people do when they're stuck, I can tell you this time and time again, is that they think of 1, 2, or 3 solutions. That's it. And then they go back and forth. Should I do A? Should I do B? Should I do C? Is C better than B? Is B better than A? Is A better than C? And back and forth they go around those 3 solutions. But the truth of our lives is that there's never just 3 solutions, ever, 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 ever. There's never just 3 solutions. We make the fatal mistake of assuming there's 3 or 4 or 5 solutions, and then we try to decide. So if somebody's stuck for anything, it could be like, I don't know what to do in my career. I'm stuck at being a good father. My relationship with my husband or wife is falling apart. I need to improve it. The best thing you can do is do the list of 20. And what the list of 20 is you sit down and you come up with 20 solutions to the problem. 20, not 2, not 5, 20. And I can tell you that it will feel like an impossible a task worthy of Sisyphus, the guy who pushed the rock up the mountain and then the rock rolled back, the Greek god. You will get to 10 and you'll be like, there's no other solutions. But you have to persevere. And this is not a polling activity. This is not go ask your friends what their solutions are. This is a think about it yourself activity, because you want to tap into your own creativity. You know what those solutions are. And so you come up with your list of 20. And I tell you, when you get to 15, you're going to be like, there's nothing. I'm done. But if you persevere to get to 20, I guarantee that you will have better solutions than your first 3. Then what you do after that is you identify your top 5 and you identify your number 1. And I have done this with coaching clients. I've done this with counseling clients hundreds and hundreds of times. And I have never, ever, ever, ever had somebody's number 1 be the first thing they thought of. I have never had somebody's top 5 be the first 5 they have thought of, ever. It's usually, you know, maybe 2 or 3 from the first 5, 1 or 2 from the second 5, and most often 1 or 2 from 16 to 20. Because the solutions we have are there. We just have to find them. And people stay stuck because they don't identify enough options and choices and focus on the first couple things that pop into their head, like that's the best idea ever.
Well, thank you so much for that answer. It's really an eye-opening, and I think many of us can benefit of this exercise. So I will try myself. And so, well, this is now we're coming to the end of this episode, and we have a last question for you. So if you could give yourself a piece of advice, what would you say to your younger self?
Wow, that's a really tough question. I would say to my younger self to continue, I wouldn't say anything to my younger self. Because one of the pieces I made a decision early on in my life, and this was right around the time I did this Outward Bound course. We did another activity where we had to identify values. And one of the values that I identified was living a life of no regrets. And by no regrets, I don't mean living a life of like nihilistic, crazy, run around, drink, do drugs, going. I have no regrets in my life because I lived when it was crazy. Not that kind of life. Like I was going to live a life where never ever did I say to myself, I wish I had said that to that person. or I wish I had done that, or that's good that that happened, but boy, I regret that choice that I made. And that value, living a life of no regrets, has been my top value throughout my life. And every single choice that I've made has been focused on, all right, if I do this, what would a person who lives their life of no regrets do? They'd step up to challenges. They wouldn't shy away from difficulties. They'd be courageous. They'd be willing. They'd be loving. And I would say for 95% of my life, I've lived in alignment with that. There's been a few times where I have not lived in alignment with that and had to really shake myself up and get really back to that. But because I hold that value so strong, I'm really happy with where I'm at in my life. I wouldn't change a thing.
Thank you, Scott, for joining us today and sharing your inspirational story with us. It's been great having you here.
It has been a pleasure to be here. What a privilege. Thank you, Elisa.
Thank you. And the last message for our listeners, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tune in next week for a new inspirational episode of The Career Changer. Thank you.